Welcome to Staff Works Explained. If you are here for the first time, please consider subscribing to this channel. In this video, we'll be talking about Kenya Power Sector, which is set for major reforms after Kenya Power and Lighting Company Kplc loses monopoly to sell electricity. Kenya's electricity sector is entering one of the most consequential transitions in decades, following regulatory changes that will allow power producers to sell electricity directly to consumers, effectively weakening the long-standing monopoly held by Kenya Power and Lighting Company (KPLC) in electricity distribution and retail supply. The shift, anchored in the new energy electricity market, bulk supply and open access regulations of 2026 introduced by the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority (EPRA) could fundamentally alter how electricity is generated, transmitted, sold, and priced in Kenya. The reforms are expected to reshape relationship between generators, distributors, large industrial consumers, and the state itself. At the stage of the emerging changes is the Kenya Energy Generating Company (KenGen), the country's largest power producer, which has announced plans to apply for transmission and distribution licenses to supply electricity directly to consumers at the Green Energy Park in Olkaria. The proposed move is more than a licensing matter. It signals the beginning of a gradual transition from Kenya traditional single buyer model, where all producers sell power to KPLC, toward a more liberalized electricity market in which consumers may eventually select their electricity supplier. The implications are significant, not only for Kenya Power's future business model, but also for electricity pricing, investment patterns, and the stability of Kenya's wider energy sector. The regulation changing Kenya Power market. Now let's look at that. The reforms are being implemented under the Energy Electricity Market Bulk Supply and Open Access Regulations of 2026. These rules operationalize provisions contained in Energy Act 2019, which has envisioned gradual opening of the electricity market. Under the previous framework, independent power producers (IPPs), as well as the state generators such as KenGen, were largely required to sell electricity to Kenya Power and Lighting Company through long-term power purchase agreement (PPPAs). Kenya Power and Lighting Company then handled transmission, distribution, and retail supply to homes, businesses, and industries. The new regulations introduces what is known as open access. In practical terms, this means licensed producers can now deliver electricity directly to eligible consumers, either using their own networks or existing infrastructure owned by Kenya Power and Lighting Company and Kenya Electricity Transmission Company (KETRACO). Where third-party infrastructure is used, producers will pay a wheeling charge, essentially a transmission fee paid for transporting electricity through another company's network. This is the same market structure used in parts of Europe, South Africa, and several Asian economies, where electricity generation and distribution is separated to encourage competition. Why does KenGen want direct access to customers? KenGen proposed direct supply model is initially targeted at industry and business operating within the Olkaria Green Park Energy. For large manufacturers, electricity costs are often the single biggest production expense after labor and raw materials. Direct supply arrangements could allow such firms to negotiate lower tariffs, predictable pricing, and dedicated clean energy access from geothermal plants. For KenGen, the incentive is equally obvious. Selling directly to consumers potentially improves revenue margins and by bypassing intermediary retail structures. The move also reflects growing pressure within Kenya's energy sector over delayed payments, rising system losses, and concerns about financial sustainability of Kenya Power and Lighting Company. Why electricity remains expensive in Kenya? Despite Kenya being one of the leading producers of renewable energy, particularly geothermal, electricity prices remain among the highest in the region. Several factors explain this contradiction. First is the cost structure embedded in power purchase agreements signed over many years, particularly with some thermal power producers. Many of these contracts contain capacity charges, meaning consumers pay for available power even when it's not fully utilized. Second are system losses, electricity lost during transmission, illegal connections, and billing inefficiencies continue to inflate cost passed to consumers. Third is foreign exchange exposure. A substantial portion of Kenya power sector obligations, including fuel cost and debt repayments, are denominated in dollars. Whenever the Kenya shillings weakens, electricity costs also rise. Taxes and levies also significantly increase final consumer tariffs. Fuel cost charges, inflation adjustment, forex adjustment fees, taxes collectively account for a notable share of monthly bills. By regional standards, Kenya industrial electricity tariffs are generally higher than those in Ethiopia and Uganda, both of which benefit from relatively cheaper hydropower generation. South Africa's tariffs have historically been lower for heavy industry, although Eskom's financial crisis has narrowed that gap in recent years. Kenya, however, remains ahead of many African peers in renewable energy penetration, grid connectivity, and installed geothermal capacity. Now let's look at the World Bank warning, and is it justified? The World Bank has cautioned that introducing competition in electricity distribution could lead to higher power costs rather than lower the cost. At first glance, the warning appears counterintuitive. Competition is usually associated with lower prices, but electricity markets behave differently from ordinary consumer markets. There's a risk that profitable industrial consumers, often referred to as anchor customers, could migrate away from Kenya Power and Lighting Company toward direct supply contracts with generators. These large customers currently subsidize part of the national grid through higher consumption volumes. If Kenya Power and Lighting Company loses a significant share of these premium customers while still carrying the obligation to maintain nationwide distribution infrastructure, costs could shift disproportionately to smaller consumers and households. This phenomenon, known in utility economics as stranded network cost, has affected electricity market reforms in several countries. The World Bank concerns, therefore, are not without merit. However, supporters of market liberalization argue that competition could force efficiency improvement, reduce procurement distribution, and gradually lower generation cost over time. The actual outcome will depend heavily on how EPRA structures wheeling charges, grid access rules, and as well as consumer protection mechanism. Who could enter the market given these changes? If the framework stabilizes, several categories of players are likely to emerge. Existing independent power producers could seek direct industrial customers. Renewable energy developers, particularly geothermal and solar farms, may establish embedded supply arrangement for industrial parks and special economic zones. Large manufacturing may also invest in captive power systems, purchasing electricity directly from producers under bilateral agreements. International energy traders and infrastructure investors would eventually participate if Kenya develops a fully competitive wholesale electricity market. But this evolution is likely to happen gradually rather than suddenly. Electricity systems are highly regulated because reliability failures affect entire economies. And what does this mean for Kenya Power and Lighting Company? The reforms do not immediately eliminate Kenya's Kplc role. The company will still remain central to distribution, retail supply, and national grid operations for foreseeable future. However, the monopoly era is beginning to weaken. Kenya Power and Lighting may increasingly evolve into a network operator rather than electricity retailer. In many liberalized markets globally, utilities eventually transition into infrastructure and grid management companies, while multiple suppliers compete for customer. That transition, if poorly managed, could destabilize financing in the short term. If properly sequenced, it could modernize Kenya electricity sector and improve competitiveness for the industry. In conclusion, we can say that the Kenya electricity market reforms represent one of the most significant policy shifts since sector liberalization began in 1990s. The opening of electricity supply to direct competition introduces opportunities for efficiency, industrial growth, and private investment, but it also carries substantial financial and regulatory risk. Kenyan planned entry into direct electricity supply is likely only the first step in a broader restructuring of the sector. What follows will depend on how effectively regulators balance competition with grid stability as well as affordability. The World Bank's concerns are grounded in real international experience, particularly around utility cost recovery and tariff constraints. Yet, maintaining monopoly structures indefinitely also carries cost, especially in economies seeking industrial competitiveness and lower energy prices. So thank you for reaching this far. You can give us your thought about this, and also like, share, and let's meet in the next one. Thank you.